Everybody out tonight, and let's have a prayer and begin our services tonight. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time to come together and to consider your word and your wisdom. We pray that you would help us as we look into your word and think about these concepts, that you would help us to apply them in ways that make our lives better here on this earth and that honor you. We ask that you'd take care of us and be with those who aren't able to be here with us tonight. Take care of the needs that they have, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Bible wisdom about money. Does the Old Testament apply to the New Testament times?
Principles, absolutely.
Principles, absolutely. How about commandments?
Yes. If they are reiterated.
If they're reiterated, then yes. So I kind of see this as there's principles that the Jewish people and Bible godly people, God said these are good ways to live your life, but then he gave a law about how to live, with sacrifices and tithes and those kinds of things. And then those things, the laws were fulfilled. They were brought to fruition at the cross. And those laws about must do certain things, is it good to remember God take a day and instead of working and living life that way, to focus your eyes and your hearts on God? Is that a good thing? But do we have to keep a Sabbath? No. So when it talks about these things about money that we're talking about, these are principles that were laid down not laid down, they had already been there, but God was pointing them out to his people. And so when we move into a new covenant time, those principles of good things to how to look at money and your work life and how to take care of poor people and those kinds of things, those are all transferable to our time. And so I hope as we're going through this today, you look at some of those things. I tend to be kind of dismissive sometimes of that's the prophets and they were talking to the Israelites. That was the Solomon and he was a king of Israel. But Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. And so if he tells us things that God has given him this wisdom for, then it'd be a good opportunity for us to learn still thousands of years later. So we go into lesson 4. By the way, we're not doing 2 at a time, but I'm going to encourage you to do 2 at a time. So next week have 5 and 6 ready, so that if we finish one a little early, we're not just ending class early, and you'll be ahead and you'll be going, what one's he talking about now? So do 5 and 6 for next week, and then we'll see how far we get. So the Proverbs. This we're in lesson 4, page 31, 32. When you look at this chapter, it's dividing or finding God's wisdom in Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. So it's looking through there and say, what does God say about financial principles in those books? And then gleaning some of those things. See, we're bringing the tithing and the gleaning stuff back together. Taking some of those things for us and helping us to apply them today. When you look at page 32, there is one of the reasons that I had trouble trying to figure out how fast we were going to go through this, because 32, how many scriptures are there on Proverbs and God's view of using money? You don't have to count them, but a lot, right? So I went through every one of them. It took me hours, hours, to go through some of these things because I didn't want to miss anything on there. But you pretty much just have to read the book of Proverbs. And if you do, you'll get all of these. But it is an important thing, because why did God write so much about it if it wasn't important? What's the root of all kinds of evil? The love of money, right? That's what we find out later, but God knew that then. And he was trying to stop his people from having problems with their relationship with money, and he keeps putting these things in, and we need to gain from that. We need to be, because can we have those same kinds of problems today? Oh, we see it all the time, don't we? With people in challenging situations, and and putting their trust in wealth and all these other things that he's going to warn us of here. So one of the things that I wanted to start with then, the idea that riches themselves, are they evil itself? We've kind of touched that already a little bit, but is the money or the treasure or the wealth, is that evil in itself?
It's how we handle it and our mindset.
It's our mindset and how we handle it. Thank you, Fluffy. So God reiterates that. Let's do Proverbs 23. I'm going to ask people to read, and if you don't raise your hand, I'll just point at you, and you can read it anyway. So if you 23 of Proverbs, verses 4 and 5. Don, yes, okay. I know you weren't raising your hand. You'll get called on later. All right.
I gotta turn there first.
Okay. Dan's got it.
He said, do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle.
So don't put your trust in those things because they're going to run away. And the idea of trusting, I thought that for a long time that if you just applied yourself in a financial sense, then you're bound to do well financially. And what I found out is you can be the smartest person around and still not necessarily. There are things that make people not do well financially. So don't trust in your own ability, because the abilities change, and God's still going to be the provider no matter how hard you think you're going to be able to work at this. So we need that relationship. Go ahead, Tammy.
Verse 4 from New American Standard, the last part of the verse is, stop dwelling on it.
Yes.
So, don't let it take up a lot of your focus.
Stop dwelling on it, New American Standard. And I agree that that is a very good, because again, we see over and over again, as we've already seen through the first couple of chapters, that God had some very righteous people who happened to be very wealthy as well. It didn't stop them from being righteous. And so it's not the wealth itself, but if you're dwelling on those things, that's where, and we've learned that, and we've seen that poor folks can dwell too much on money, and rich folks can dwell too much on money, and people in between can dwell too much on money. And so we need to be careful wherever we are in our financial world. One of the ones I thought was interesting is work is primary tool for generating wealth. Chapter 12, verses 11. Who can read that one for me? Who's got it right there? You're all turning to it, I see. Tammy's got it, 12:11.
One who works his land will have plenty of bread, but one who pursues worthless things lacks sense.
One who works his land will have bread. One who pursues worthless things will do what?
Lacks sense.
Lacks sense. So that's the first prohibition against video games. Pursuing worthless things, he lacks sense. That's what, I don't know why that video games jumped in there when I was reading that one. But that concept is that focus again, and where you spend your time. And it's a general rule. And we've talked about general ideas. Generally, the person who works their land gets out, isn't slothful, but moves forward in their attempts to gain income. God's going to take care of them, especially his people at this time, when he promised that he would do that over and over again. And for his, as Dan was talking about this morning in our thing, he's promised that to Christians too. He's promised that to his children now. So another part that God spent a lot of time seeming to point out to us is what we do with the needy. Who's got 19:17? Go ahead, Maddie Mad.
Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him with a fee.
What does it mean to lend to the Lord? Pay it forward. That's a nice. When you give a cup of cold water to what is that to do to Jesus? What you've done to them. If you visit, who have I visited in when they were sick or in prison, or who have I given a cup of cold water? You're doing that as if it's to Jesus. So here, if you're lending to the poor, he's telling them and us many years later, that by helping people who are in need at that time, it's as if you're doing it for God. lending to God, giving that not just to that person, and that's a good thing to do, but and you're not storing up treasures from the concept that I had some folks Deb and I've talked to in the past that kind of felt like they were, another crown, a jewel in the crown in heaven. Oh, if I do this, then God's going to put another jewel in my crown in heaven. I don't think that's what he's talking about, not lending to God. Now God will owe me something. I don't think that's what it's meaning, but it's as if you're doing it for him. And so, do we have any poor people with us today? So, do we think about that? And this is where, as I was going through this, I started going, well, am I ready to help? If I'm ready to help, and there's not a need that I have that I know about right then, well then, God's not going to require me to do that. But if I'm now find somebody in need, and I know they could use this help, and I'm not ready to do it, that's going to be a challenge to me. And so that's what I'm going to encourage you guys to do as you're thinking. Be ready to help the poor. Somebody who is less fortunate than you. That's a poor person, right? You may not have a lot of money, but a person who's less fortunate than you is a poor person.
If we're ready, God will find a way for it to happen.
There you go. And I think that's true, and I think that's what he's telling us. Go ahead, Josh.
I think also there are plenty of opportunities to help. So if you feel like there's no opportunity, but I'm ready, like you're still not helping the poor.
Are you looking? Are you looking? Right. So you can be ready and not do anything. I agree. But if you're not ready, you certainly won't do anything. And so it takes both. You have to. And as I was going through this, I'm rethinking now, am I ready and just not seeing a whole bunch right this second? Because we can go out in the world right now and we will find somebody, you can give every dollar that you have, you can find somebody else who could use it, who's poor. And so there's a balance there though, right? God doesn't want us to become poor in order to help somebody who's poor, necessarily. Maybe there'll be situations where that would happen. But what I'm hoping each of us will do in our Christian walk is consider this money as God's money in the first place, and then be ready to share those funds with others. Tim?
Well, I think money, like so many other good things in life, can corrupt us. I mean, power can corrupt us, love can corrupt us. Many people ruin their lives over love before.
Yeah.
And so money is no different. It can do wonderful things for us and other people, but if we, just like so many people have said here, misuse or mishandle it, it's a bad thing.
Yep. And
Maybe not just ready, but ready and willing.
ready and willing, and then as Josh said, actually doing. So all of those. Does it make a distinction here on this poor person of if they got themselves in that situation or not? Every one of them that I read, go ahead.
I haven't read that, where it does make that distinction, but how many druggies do we see every day out panhandling? And they are spending their time with the first one we've just read, and they make no sense because they have no sense because they're using it.
Playing video games all the time, right? Yeah. So this is exactly where I went with it. We just passed a young man as we were coming in here today for class who looked like he was in his 20s, out with a sign, and I'm saying, can't that go right up the hill to the Save-On and get a job in a minute and be having enough money by the end of the day? So that's a question then of wisdom of who is really poor. Who do we actually, because there are so many poor. Did you have a comment, Dan?
I'll wait till you're done.
Well, I'm reiterating the point that there are so many poor, relatively less wealth than every one of us sitting here, that we could give every dollar that we have and still not take care of that need. So we have to be careful, but we also have to be willing and doing according to this, because we're lending to God when we do that. We're helping this person, and we're getting, or we're honoring God by sharing our thing. So that's the tough one, though. At what point do we say this person put themselves in a situation that if I just give them money and they go buy more of whatever it is that got them there in the first place, am I really helping this poor person? That's the challenge. Dan?
So you got a couple of principles. One, that word for lend can also mean unite. And so when we're helping the poor, we're uniting with the Lord because he wants people helped. I had a conversation with one of of our members had a person living with them that she was helping out, just being very kind. And she was trying to convince him that he needed to work, and he said, no, I can get more money panhandling than I can working. Like, I can make more money at the end of an off-ramp than I can if I had a job.
Right.
And he's able-bodied, and he told me, he said, I don't have to work. Well, then you have the other principle on the other side from 1 Thessalonians, or if a person won't work, don't let him eat. And so there's the balance. And so I tend to want to help poor people that I know.
Yes.
That I know what their circumstance is. And there's plenty of those too.
Yes.
I don't have to find them at the end of off-ramps to help.
And there may be a time where you see this person laying alongside the road at an off-ramp who looks like they need help, and you, the Samaritan, will say, I need to help in that situation. But in a general sense, if you don't know that situation, that's been a hard one for me to say, hey, let me just give this money to somebody who I have no idea how they're in that situation.
Just one other comment. When I used to get off on Newberry Hill and head towards Silverdale, either way, there was a guy that was, had his sign out. And I just happened one day to see him when he was done with work, jump into his nice pickup and drive away.
I know
He's sitting there with his dog, like I'm homeless and I have nothing, and he takes the money and he gets in his pickup and goes wherever he is. And I never felt guilty about not giving him anything.
I had the same, we take Newberry Hill also, and I know the same guy that he's talking about. And he would park his truck way back away from the corner, so nobody could associate the truck with him. And it was a nice truck. I agree. So it just shows that because there are cheaters, though. Does that mean we shouldn't help the poor? And we not only have to be ready, but we have to be wise in how we do that. Mark?
You just made kind of the same point. Is God wants us to be charitable, but doesn't mean we excuse discernment. So we need to be discerning about how we utilize this as our stewards of what He's given us. We always go to the street corner, so it's out there panhandling, but there's plenty of opportunities. And I think one of the challenges He gives us is we have to be very careful that the convenience of just dealing with the situation and not knowing exactly the circumstances is probably a problem versus being charitable.
Yep. And I've used that, another example, niece Megan had stuff in her car with socks and jerky and I can't remember what other things she had in it. And so instead of giving money to people in those situations, she at least knew, hey, they could use some socks. If nothing else, they'll get something that would be useful to them, and they won't be able to drink it or smoke it later. So maybe there's some wisdom in still trying to help. We have, as an opportunity as a church, we get regular requests for funds. All of the money that's in the church that's given every week could be going to those things every week, and we would have no local things here because all of that money would be there. So it's a challenge to try to figure out what's a need and what's a want in the church giving and in our own giving. So I wanted to take some time to do that because it is one of the things that made me stop and think, am I being ready? Am I preparing myself to help? Debbie and I have had these conversations a number of times over the years, and then we need to keep re-looking at that. Where are we with that? Any more comments on helping the poor? So the Proverbs then go on and talk about a lot of other things. Like we had talked about, money and wealth are not inherently good. There are better things. And we shouldn't spend all of our energy and time to gain funds, only material things that are transitory, as Dan was reading in that one of the first ones there. An interesting one that I see, 19:4. Who's got 19:4? Go ahead, Lee. 19:4.
Wealth adds many friends, but a poor person is separated from his friend.
Wealth adds many friends. What's that mean to you?
Everybody comes to help you spend your money.
You've heard the lottery winners? When they get their name published, like every relative that they haven't seen in the last 16 years calls, and that was one of the things that it was pretty consistent on reading about people when they come into a bunch of money is suddenly a whole bunch of family and friends are around them. Everybody wants, the prodigal son, that same idea, seemed to be very popular when his money was there. And then his money runs out and nobody's helping him. And so we need to be careful in being aware that those motives are out there, but we also got to treat our friends as, have the best possible motive. Assume that people have a good motive toward you, but be aware that these things are out there. You shouldn't oppress the poor. Don't trust in the riches. Again, we've had that conversation already. Investing is, I read this one and I couldn't get this one from this. For 31:16, investing shown as a wise means of increasing wealth. I think this author's trying to make a good point, but I'm not sure who's got that one and can read that one. We can have a little discussion about that. Sam, 31:16.
31:16, she considers the field and buys it. With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard.
So I didn't get from that, this is the worthy woman, investing is shown as a wise means of increasing wealth. Did you get that from the considering the field?
Oh yeah, because she planted a vineyard in it.
Okay.
So
She's investing her time?
She's got a field that's got nothing in it. She plants a vineyard, now it becomes a means of profit for her.
So, yes, Jonathan?
I think this is a specific kind of investing, where it's an investing that includes future work, not investing that is like the kind of investing we think about today, which is more speculation, where we
Like non-fungible things.
Yes, tokens.
Bitcoins.
Yeah, or a company we've never heard of, but maybe they're doing well, maybe they aren't. Not to say that's bad to invest in other companies, but this is like it sounds like she's looking for something to use, and she finds a good thing to use and invest in it.
And this was why it was tough for me as I went through this. I was like, man, this author seems to be telling us that investing, and when I think of investing, I think of investing in Microsoft or investing in Boeing or investing, putting money away that will grow and help the company and help us. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, this goes along the same lines. I remember taking like micro and macroeconomic classes, and the professor specifically saying, when we're using the word investing in this class, I want you to understand that we never mean all day playing the stock market. Like there's investing as in putting your resources into something you believe in or trust in for some other reason besides to play the stock market.
Yep. Good. Thank you. John?
Investing is not inherently wrong. There's nothing wrong. In the parable of the talents, the guy with the 5 and the guy with the 2, how did the one with the 5 make 5 more? How did the one with the 2 make 2 more? Did they go out and steal it?
Right.
Or did they use what they had wisely to increase their profit for their master?
And that's where I finally got to on this. And so this worthy woman that in this example considered this field and said, if I use some of the funds that God's already given me and put it into here and then put some more effort into it with the building of the vineyard, then it will pay off dividends over time. And so God's blessings will be multiplied. And that's the way Israel was. God gave them land. He said, here's the land. And then he told them what to do, and I'll bless you, and just see if I won't. And so he gave them this land as an investment for the future generations. And so overall, investing in what we do. Now, that could be in our physical life. It could be in our spiritual life. And this is one of the things that I wanted to kind of get people thinking about. How do you invest in your spiritual life?
You read and study.
Read and study.
You pray. You ask for things to make you grow.
Good. Ask for the growth from God. Yeah. And so energy put in this woman's case, is what she knew was going to bring about future dividends in a physical sense. If I have more crops in this one, I'll be able then to have an income coming from that. If we invest in our spiritual lives, there will be dividends that will come. It's the natural result of investing in those things. Go ahead, Sam.
Similarly, in a spiritual sense, talking to someone, evangelizing, taking a risk. So, knocking on doors or whatever can be an incredibly painful or an incredibly rewarding situation spiritually.
Yes?
It's a risk. So,
Agreed.
put that in the physical thing also. It's like,
And
I
so,
don't think that's inherently bad. If it is, I'm in trouble.
yeah.
That's what
Well,
I'm built on.
I think what we're talking about here is pointing out that that isn't inherently bad if the goal is to use the resources that God has given us, put into a situation where that money, or in this case 401k, is used for helping companies to, that they take out, companies sell stock in order to raise capital in order to do stuff, right? And so that's why they do it. They have these rounds of stock options that they do well, otherwise, why wouldn't they just keep it all themselves if they didn't need any of that, right? So that's how most corporations, large ones especially, have raised the capital in order to do those things. So when you invest in that company, you're loaning them the money, essentially. You're buying that stock that then allows those funds to be used for growth. And so I don't think that's bad at all. And I think this example of, in a physical sense, of this woman considering the field, then can they be applied to a spiritual sense of putting the blessings that God has given us spiritually, invest in that, and you will get dividends from that. Jonathan?
I think where the wisdom comes in is that she considered the field. She didn't just go out and buy a field.
Right. Oh, that's for sale. Let me have that one. Right.
Yeah, there was consideration given.
Agreed. And that's part of the process that we need to be, in our physical sense, and be, crypto sounds good. Yes, Dan was saying that. There's some challenges that people find in whether it's speculation or investment. So, anybody else have a comment? Did I miss anybody? Let's go down to, under the Old Covenant, future prosperity is tied to returning the proper share to the Lord with generosity. 3, 9, and 10. Who's got 3, 9, and 10 for us? Proverbs 3, verses 9 and 10. Go ahead, David.
Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine.
So this is kind of one of those if-then. If you honor God with those things, then your vats will be full. Was that a promise of exact proportions? Or was that a general statement? Did everybody who put money into the thing, did they always get full vats? I would say no, because you just do this and the Assyrians invade and your crops get burned and what you just invested. But in the general sense, if you honor God with these things, did not you see a physical blessing in this Old Testament time where God was the king of this theocracy? Remember what we were talking about with the tithing and the thing after the 7th year? What were we supposed to do with our land? Let it lie fallow. How could you let it lie fallow for a year if you weren't getting any income from it?
God blessed you to have you be able to gather enough to survive that year.
On the prior year, God blessed you enough to allow you to go for 2 years or a little more till the crop came in the next time. Joshua?
I think also, too, if you don't let the land lie fallow, the first fruits eventually become your only fruits.
Yeah, good point. You will eventually, so there was wisdom in what God was doing for that, but the point was you had to trust that God was going to help you get through that. And He said He would do that, and He did it over and over again, and the general thing was there. In the 50th year of Jubilee, there was 3 years, wasn't it, where it was, the 1 year, the next year, and you got to wait till the following year to plant. And so we have this Old Covenant thing. Maddie, go ahead. I was just going to say we have the Old Covenant example of this idea that when we honor God with our first fruits, He will make sure that these blessings come in. Can you apply that to the New Testament times, our times?
So exactly that. As a person new to making money, I've been thinking about that because the principle that we see all throughout the Old Testament is that first fruits or the best of the lambs and whatever, and that was the really important part to God, that because
That's,
anyone has
Maddie, you got exactly to where I was going with this. Great minds. All right. So there is no New Testament requirement to give your first fruits. Not that I can see in the physical sense. You know, oh, my crop has there, I must take this and give it to God. But the principle of giving the first of what God's, the choicest, the first on that, when you are considering how am I going to spend the blessings that God gives me now, do we consider God first? Or is he way down on whatever we have left over? And that's what I was looking at, was how do I do that? Not, you know, and I want each of you to consider that. When some of us get a fixed income from Social Security, that's all we get. And some of us get that income plus their working income. And so each of those things, which is your first? And it's the choicest. The idea in this case, it's what we are realizing comes from God, and we're going to give it back. And so when we're preparing our lives and arranging our lives, whatever you get coming in, consider God first. It's not necessarily the way I've done it. I've said, well, I want to give some here, and I want to put God in the mix, but I hadn't really considered the first fruits argument or thought process. John?
It's an interesting thought in that most of us with our work incomes, when those of us who were working, with our work incomes, we would be given opportunities to put money aside for healthcare insurance or for investment purposes in our retirement funds and those kind of things. And we would usually gladly participate in those things and work with what we have left. But then we don't consider God in that same category, and we should be setting aside a portion of what we have left and then work with what we have left.
So Debbie and I have always tried to do that, our own things of making sure that God is in the mix. But in my head, I hadn't really considered this first fruits concept, because in the time of those people that Solomon is speaking to, God specifically told them, I want you to do this, because by doing this, you're trusting in me, and see if I won't, I forget that it'll be pat down and overflowing, and I can't remember.
Luke. What Malachi wrote was, test me in this, and see if I don't open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will be no room for you to store it. Jesus is the one said, give, and God will give, and pack down, shaking together, and flowing over. That's Luke.
Good. So that is a New Testament concept.
Yeah.
It is. And then this first fruits concept is one that I hope that we'll each take, as we are considering our own finances, consider that as you're deciding what you're going to do. In the long term, that's an investment that will repay manyfold. Maddie?
I mean, just as I was considering that, like, I thought about, like, when I get my first check, when I first started work, like, or, you know, it's not a check, but first deposit, whatever, and it's just so immaterial. I was like, maybe I should literally, like, go write a check to the church, like, the first thing. Like, I was trying to make it real to myself, because
Right.
I don't really think about money that much yet, at least. I don't know. It just doesn't feel very real, so it feels like one of the things, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it more than that.
Right.
You know, I don't know.
Well, and that is good that you're in that situation, that you have been able to think about it. There's some people who in a situation is, you know, how many get enough money today to pay for my food, or my rent's due on the 1st or whatever. And so some they don't have a lot of extra to wonder about that. And I'm glad that you've been blessed in that situation. And so what do we do when we're in that situation that God has given us? I hope you'll do what we're talking about here and consider first fruits, giving to God. Dan?
Well, I always do a budget at the beginning of the year, monthly budget, and for mental state, the first item is the Lord, and then mortgage and whatever else comes down after. But I always just put that at the top for my own, comfort. coming out first, you know, and then when I got down to the bottom, that miscellaneous, well, that's already gone. I don't tap into that, so.
And that I think is a great way to go. One of the things that we've talked about too, though, is if everything that we have that we are not needing to live goes into that category and it's given to God, and then we see the person who's poor and we don't have any dollars that I really could help this person out, but I gave everything to God. That's going to create a situation there too. So being aware of that, of having funds available in your own situation where you can be ready to help the poor, but putting God at the top of the list, maybe setting that aside as a separate thing. Here's what I give to the church, and this is some money, whatever that number is for each of us, that I can help somebody if it's needed. John?
If you are helping, or you are giving to God.
There you go. And yet some, though, see their only, our offering is on Sunday morning and that's what you give to God. And I'm trying to change that attitude in all of us, me included. That's one of the ways that we do this. We support the local congregation and we support the work and all the things that we were talking about earlier, but we are also having funds in our own budget available to help somebody who is in need is a good thing to consider. So, yes, we're helping God, we're giving to God, and He's going to bless us as He promised in these people's cases. I believe that still happens today, that our attitude in giving is reflected back to us in a lot of ways. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I mean, and please correct me if I'm missing something or I'm not aware of something, but do we see a time in the New Testament where giving to God wasn't actually, in fact, giving to other people? I mean, in Corinthians, they're expected to be giving money for the sake of the church of Jerusalem. In Acts, we see them giving money to help those who are needy there. Do we see a time of instruction in the New Testament or example where money was given that wasn't, and I'm talking about, I guess, like strict examples, where it wasn't given for the purpose of helping others?
Well, we were each to have enough to take care of our own needs and to help those who, so we're to work with our hands. So that's take care of our own needs. That's one way God blesses us. And then, so some is to be used for making sure we're not in need, so somebody else has to help us.
And I'm not trying to get away from a church like offering. I think that what we do is right by example. But I'm just trying to, like, what John said kind of stood out to me. Like, giving to others is giving to God. And now I'm thinking, well, do I see times where giving to God was something other than giving to others?
Yeah. No,
There's also evangelism. It's not just benevolence.
Well, no, absolutely. I'm not talking strictly about benevolence. That was to give to Paul to preach. Right. That was to give to, yeah.
In my thinking, if I had planned in my heart to give to the church and I found a need that comes in front of me that, boy, that's something that is really needed, I'm going to, in those cases, take care of that need. And I may not give as much or any that week to God. Now, there's thankfully not been a lot of times where that's the case, because again, if you're putting some aside to help somebody in need, then you'll also have that to be able to dip into, and that's, I guess, why I'm bringing it up, because I do think we need to be ready, and it's giving to God is helping other people. Tim.
I think that's where the corruption of money comes in. We tend to spend more than we make.
Ooh.
We don't set it aside like we're talking.
Ooh, Tim is just, as I'm going through this again, it's that thoughtful use of God's money that we sometimes don't do. We get through life getting to the next thing instead of thinking about these as blessings that I'm going to be using to honor God. And I agree, many people and me in times in my life, that's been a challenge, because it's sometimes your focus gets lost. And so that's why one of the reasons we're having the class is to help us focus. Go ahead.
A more worldly example, that the shipyard is known to give many people a lot of extra work, overtime forced in, but there are times when there is none. The Navy is not building ships, there's not much maintenance, and I always counsel people who are coming in new to the shipyard to budget your life, your mortgage, all those things that you need, as if you will never get any.
Good point.
Because you don't know what the needs of the shipyard will be, or your job will be. And just because you're getting this amount of money this year doesn't mean next year you will.
Good point. So if people hadn't heard Tammy, her point was when people come into the shipyard and there's overtime and overtime, don't set your life budget on the overtime included, because when the overtime goes away, now you're in a challenging situation. So live within your means, make your budget at what your actual salary is, and then the blessings will be blessings. And those are practical things that we can learn by going through these Proverbs. And that's what I keep seeing these things in my head, as seeing me as a 20-something-year-old, Maddie's situation now. This would have been a good class for me to go through during that time, because we hit situations that there were times where we were flush with dollars, and other times where, well, it was tight. And if I would have been thinking about that back here, it would have been less stressful, I think, making these choices and commitments back here when we hit those tight spots. And so, but trying to live within your budget live within the means that God has given you, is an wise person. Solomon will say you've done well if you do that. All right, this one I spent most of the time on Proverbs because there were so many things in here. It took me, as I mentioned, a long time to get through them. And so I didn't want to just go over them, because the next ones, they have general truths in some cases, and Ecclesiastes have several, but a lot of the wisdom of the Bible about money is in Proverbs. And so when you got nothing else to do, read Proverbs, and you'll have God's wisdom through Solomon. And who else? There was other people who collected part of the Proverbs. But through God preserving it for us, we will learn that money is a powerful tool for good in the hands of the wise, and leave God and the righteous. When you leave God and righteousness out of that equation, then it becomes the opposite. So that's his conclusion of these Proverbs today. So we'll start next week on the last several. It's probably not going to take us, I don't think it's going to take us a long time, because there weren't as many of these ideas within the next several books, but he's going through them to be thorough. Like when you get to Song of Solomon, the book is generally deemed to extol this, and if that's the case, there isn't much about funds in it, but he puts it in there to just be thorough and let us know. So we'll spend a few minutes on the last few points through the rest of this one, and be on to the next chapter next week. Randy and I are going to be switching off since he was out of town this week. It didn't work out, but at some point he's going to catch these, and then I'm going to be out of town hopefully in March for a few weeks, and so he'll be, since we're stretching, that was one of the reasons I was trying to get it done before March, so I didn't have to leave it all on him. But by that time we should be well into that, and I hope each of you take the time to go through the lessons, because it will. You're going to get more out of it if you spend and read those associated things and contemplate them before you get here. Thanks for your attention. Who's our song leader today?